So to kind of backtrack a little bit, a lot of confusing concepts in the world of psychology and self compassion. Um, and again, I want to make sure that uh, as far as I'm not going to try to define things, but at least that make sure we're all talking about the same thing. And it's much easier, I think of this as self acceptance as opposed to self compassion, which a little bit more challenging, at least more confusion. But other concepts that are out there, like self esteem and self worth and self concept and self value and self respect, these are all terms used in counseling by psychologists and stuff that I suspect have value in their world and certainly in research and things like that. But again, we're not going to talk about this stuff. Although we are going to talk about self esteem here for a few minutes, because there's so much confusion around self esteem, again, I think what we think of as self esteem as being beneficial, it's actually self compassion that's beneficial, not self esteem. So, what is self esteem? Well, it's basically used to describe a person's overall sense of self worth or personal value, right? Um, and it's strange because it involves a variety of beliefs about yourself, such as your appearance or your beliefs or emotions and behavior. And that, in and of itself, already starts to make you understand, if you think about it long enough, where uh, where self-esteem isn't really quite what we inherently think it is. In other words, if you have high self-esteem, then how is your appearance going to affect your self-esteem? It shouldn't, right? If Because again, inherently, our thoughts of self-esteem shouldn't really be uh, anchored or connected to your appearance. Or if your appearance is better, that shouldn't necessarily boost your self-esteem. It just means your appearance is more on the way you hope it would be, or something like that. But it's not going to change. It shouldn't change your self-esteem. There's over 5,000 books on self-esteem in Amazon under the self-help section. Okay. So it's a huge thing, right? In our society, self-esteem is considered the foundation of individual success, right? You know, we believe that, successful people, high achievers, leaders, have high self-esteem. And you're going to see the studies actually don't bear that out. So what's my beef with self-esteem? Well, the problem is, again, the research doesn't support what our society believes about self-esteem. In studies, high self-esteem does not, I repeat, does not predict better performance or greater success. Research shows that high self-esteem does not make you a more effective leader. It does not make you a more appealing lover. It doesn't make you more likely to have a healthy lifestyle, and it doesn't make you more attractive or more compelling in an interview. Scientifically shown. On the other hand, self compassion actually enhances self worth. So, in a study done in 2011, self compassion comes from within, while self esteem depends on external circumstances. And that's the issue. That's the beef I have with self esteem, right? Anything that's going to come from something external to us is going to be there's going to be too much that can affect it, right? And that's what we're looking to avoid. On the other hand, people who practice self-compassion continue feeling good about themselves despite instances of failure or perceived inadequacy or imperfection. That does not mean that you will then be a failure or more likely to be a failure, or that you will perceive yourself as inadequate all the time. The studies show that as well. Okay. Self compassion is a willingness to look at your own mistakes and shortcomings with kindness and understanding. That's hard for most of us to do. In our society, we tend to be self-critical, right? We beat ourselves up when we look at our own mistakes that we've made, whether they're big or little, and when we look at our shortcomings, we have difficulty doing that. With self-compassion, you neither judge yourself harshly, nor do you feel the need to defensively focus on all of your awesome qualities to protect your ego. So you don't get that defensiveness where you've got to basically try to build yourself up. So, of course, it's not surprising, as we talked about last time, that self compassion leads to higher levels of personal well being, higher levels of optimism, higher levels of happiness, higher levels of peace, lower levels of anxiety, and lower levels of depression. As I always say, if there was a pill that did all of these things, every single one of us would be on it, no matter what it cost, right? If there was a pill that helped us become more optimistic or happier or increased our level of personal well-being or decreased our levels of anxiety or depression, we would all be on it. Yet self-compassion does that, and self-compassion is rarely prescribed by medical professionals. It's rarely, even though the research is out there, it's rarely used even in by psychologists or counselors or therapists. That part of it is surprising, right? But not really, because there's no one making a bunch of money selling self-compassion. Self-compassion is not to be confused with a lack of self-responsibility, such as letting yourself off the hook or lowering the bar. That's what, again, those are the misconceptions, that if I practice self-compassion, I'm going to be letting myself off the hook. I'm going to be lowering my bar, so I will not be as successful, or I will be lowering the bar for what success is. And that, again, doesn't turn out to be true. That's not, that the studies show just the opposite. You can be self-compassionate while still accepting responsibility for your performance. That is accepting self responsibility for your performance. That is not accepting blame. There's a difference. Blame is the self critical part. Responsibility is the part that says, I am responsible for this. I did the best I could, right? At the moment. And perhaps another time I could do better or could have done better. So I remember one time when my daughter was in high school, she was a senior, and she was working really hard, and she had a bunch of college interviews, and she was on physical, taking her final exams, and she was having migraine headaches, and she was pretty tired. Actually, she was really tired, and she had a final exam week, and her last test was calculus, and anyway, she studied as hard as she could, and she ended up getting a B on the test and B in the class, which was fine. But she, after she got it, she was beating herself up about it. I remember her telling. She said to me, "I I said what happened?" And she says, "Well, I just didn't work hard enough. I should have studied harder." And I remember all I could tell her was, I said, I spoke to you. I saw what you were going through at the time. You were exhausted. You were tired. You were working as hard as you could at that time. You couldn't work any harder, and you ended up with a B. Now, today, which was now this was like 3 weeks later, right? She was home, she was out of school, she was rested. I said, today you could have worked harder, you probably could have gotten an A on it. But at that moment in time, you were doing the best you could. And I believe that no matter what it is, most of us are doing the best that we can all the time. It may not be very good, but it's the best that we could at that moment in time with dealing with the things that we have to deal with at that moment. And that's the key. That's where the self compassion. Maybe I could have done better, but I couldn't at that moment for whatever reason. I was had all these challenges. I was dealing with all this stuff. I was having these issues. So what's the key, right? They say it's not about the outcome, right? It's not about where you end up. They always say it's about the journey. Well, I don't think it's actually about the journey per se. Yes, it's about the journey, but I think it's really about your perception of the journey, because the perception part of it is really um it's really how you choose, because this is the if you know nothing else from this whole webinar, it's really that we have a choice in life, not about the events, but how we choose to perceive the events. And so how are you going to perceive the journey, right? Because, I sort of like to call myself the super victim, right? I used to be able to create a victim scenario no matter what was going on, no matter how good or bad something might be. I was one of those guys that could probably win the lottery and I could make it a negative. I could, oh my God, how horrible. You know how much I had to pay in taxes? You wouldn't believe all these taxes. You have to pay more in taxes when you win the lottery than you normally have to do. And all these people started showing up, family that I never even knew I had, people, everyone wanting money. They were like, they wouldn't leave me alone. I was so much better off before I won the lottery. Of course, I was complaining then too, right? So you can always find a way to perceive any event in a negative fashion if you want. We all know those people, right? So it's how you think about the ups and downs of the journey, not the actual journey itself, in my mind. The curious thing is that if you're self compassionate, research suggests that you're more likely to actually arrive at your planned destination, which is always kind of nice. So, people who experience self compassion were more likely to see their weaknesses as changeable. That's huge, right? That's the part that again shows that even with self compassion, you're not accepting your weakness. That's the way I am, and that's the way it's always going to be, and I'm always going to suck, right? No, the studies actually show if you're compassionate with yourself, you actually are more likely to be able to change those weaknesses or improve on those weaknesses. People who experience self compassion had increased motivation to improve and avoid the same mistake again in the future. Again, that's what we're looking for. This didn't happen with people with high self esteem. People that had high self compassion. And people who experienced self compassion led to superior performance when subjects were given a second chance to improve their score. So they had people who took a test and they failed it, and then they took the whole group that failed and gave them a second chance. Half of them they taught them self compassion, and the other half they didn't. And the ones that practice self compassion were more likely to study harder and actually improve their score. Actually, here's the results. Compared to subjects who focused on bolstering self esteem, those who took a self compassionate view of their earlier failure studied longer, 25% longer, and scored higher on the second test. So again, debunking that thing about self compassion is going to let me off the hook, and I'm not going to do as well. Why is it so powerful? Well, Heidi Halverson thinks it's because it's a non-evaluative process, um, and I kind of tend to agree with that. Self-compassion helps you detach from your ego. It allows you to more easily confront the issues directly. It gives you a realistic sense of your abilities and your actions, and allows you to be more open-minded on figuring out what to do the next time. That's what the studies show. Again, I don't really need the study, so self compassion is a good thing, but it's nice to have that evidence to show that it actually is a beneficial thing. That's why I try to spend some time going over this stuff. So, how do we get to self compassion when we're filled with so much self criticism, or what I like to call self hatred? So this is my perspective. Again, you can look at a lot of different. There's tons of programs now on self compassion. Um, Again, those programs didn't do much for me. That does not mean they won't do anything for you. they don't get to what I call the root of things, like this process does. That's what I had to do to get to this self compassion sort of idea to work for me. These sort of are on the surface. I, again, kind of look at them sort of like medication, right? So, medicine, we talked about last time, works at that level where you never get to the root. In other words, you take the medicine and it lowers your blood pressure and everyone's happy. And there's nothing wrong with that. Okay. But it does mean you'll be taking the medicine forever. Right. So for these techniques, I think you have to do the technique to feel that sort of level of self-compassion. Whereas with this, I think once you have this understanding, the self-compassion will come easier and easier until it comes, let's call it second nature, or automatically, or at least much quicker than it does in the beginning. So from my perspective, you need to get to the root, and we'll talk about that. And it's done through self-awareness, not through change. This is key. So back uh, in 2000, mid 2000, 2003 or four, or something like that. When I sort of started to understand this stuff, I really thought I would be able to react to any event. Remember, we talked about the event stimulus response sort of paradigm, right? And I thought that once I understood where all this stuff came from, that then I would respond in the way I would hope I would always respond. And that didn't happen. And when it didn't happen, then my misery, as I like to call it, grew, a thousandfold. Because before, at least I was doing it sort of unconsciously, right? I didn't know that I was doing it. I was naive. But when I understood and knew that I was doing it and I kept doing it anyway, then I beat myself even more because now I was an idiot, right? Because now there was no self compassion there, right? But I didn't make the change, and it took me a long time to realize that it's the self awareness that was the key, and with the self awareness, the self compassion would come, and there was magic in that self awareness because that's when all the change occurred without me trying to make the change. So we only know what we know from our own experience, right? So learning it intellectually is one thing, experiencing it is another. And we want to ultimately get to the experience, but you first have to, from my standpoint, I think you can go right to experience, but most of us, if we haven't gotten it through experience, we can get it through into sort of an intellectual understanding process. Again, not trying to change anything, just becoming aware. That's where the Tao says, everything happens in the non-doing. All is accomplished in the non-doing. And I used to read that and I used to go, what the heck is that talking about? How can anything be accomplished in the non-doing? It makes no sense. How can anything be accomplished? Can anything happen? I used to scratch my head over that until I started doing this. And then I found that just with the self-awareness that everything changed without me trying to change it. And that was just monumental for me. So find what works for you. That's key. Not everything is going to work for everyone. Not any technique, not any pill, not anything. You have to find what works for you. Last time we talked briefly about these strategies that are out there, right? These I don't call them platitudes, right? Be your own best friend. Know that you are inherently worthy, right? I mean, if you could just know that, right, that used to actually work negatively for me because people, oh, you just have to know that you're worthy, and I go, okay, I have to know that, and I try to convince myself of it and write it down or look at myself in the mirror and say it, and none of that worked, right? Eliminate negative reactions. Yeah, just eliminate them, right? Those are not good for you. Just let it go. Good luck with that, right? How's that working for you? right? And you see these things on the internet all over the place, right? We saw this last time. You are good enough. Yeah, just put these all over the place, and that'll make you good enough, right? That'll teach you that you are good enough. If it works for you, wonderful. Didn't work for me. Same thing. I love me, right? We talked about putting. I can't help it. I got to show these things because I think they're great, right? You can put these things on your tattoo them on your flank or on your side. But the thing is, you got to be. I think you got to be female to do this because it looks good if you're female. If you're a guy, it just doesn't. It just doesn't work, man. Just doesn't work. Not quite the same. So the Buddha said, "Do not believe anything I say." Right? So you got to go out and test it, find it for yourself, right? See what works for you, see what doesn't work, and go from there. So as we work towards self-compassion, for me again, it's getting to the root. So the first thing is thought belief. Believe in your thoughts, awareness of your unconscious beliefs, especially about yourself, uh, understanding and coming to understand that we're all the same, we're all one, and that's what we're going to try to do with some of these exercises is kind of start to get you to understand that to where you get to feeling completely worthy and good enough, right? But that's that's a leap, like trying to jump across the Grand Canyon in one step, right? It ain't gonna happen. But learning that life is lived in our head, right? So thought belief, that is, um, thoughts are happening all the time, and we think that just because we have a thought that we have to believe it. So I like to say, don't believe everything you think. Thoughts are constantly happening. This happened, when I remember when I was trying to learn to meditate. My meditation techniques have changed completely. I used to try, a kind of taught meditation in a fairly classic sort of way, trying to stop your thoughts and such. And that, you know, it was horrible, right? Because I just remember sitting there and oh my God, what a great meditation I had today. I was there and I meditated for 30 minutes and it like the time just flew. I didn't even realize 30 minutes went by and oh, it was so great. So that's a judgment. Not a positive judgment, but it's still a judgment, right? Next day was more like, oh my God, how horrible. I was sitting there and I was scratched. I couldn't get comfortable and I couldn't stop. I kept thinking and my mind was just racing and racing and it was awful. You know, I thought it had been 20 minutes. I looked at the clock and it had been 2 minutes, you know, horrible, you know. And so it took me a long time to where I started to realize that I don't necessarily have to stop the thoughts in meditation or anytime. I just don't have to believe them, or I can observe them, or notice them, or watch them. And then it becomes fun. It becomes, remember, I told last time, I think I talked about it becomes like play, because you're sitting there and your thoughts they just, they run on, just one thought after another, all these tangent sort of thoughts as you're there. And if you don't beat yourself up about it, it becomes just like fun. But it's again, you don't have to believe all those thoughts. So I remember one time I was driving. Actually, I wasn't driving. I was riding in the back seat. We were coming back from a meeting, and there were two guys in the front seats, and they were talking away, and I was in the back, and I was sort of in my own little world. I think they were talking about golf, and I'm not old enough to golf yet, um, so I wasn't paying too much attention. And as we were headed down the highway, we came across this 18 wheeler, this tractor trailer. And you know how in a car where it's really dirty, some people will write with their finger on there, wash me or whatever. Well, this trailer was really dirty, and someone I guess someone. It was written on the back of the door just like that, but it was written not with like a finger, like it was very, very precise. And across the back of the trailer door, it said, "Don't believe everything you think." And I thought that was pretty weird. I wish I would have thought of taking a picture of it. And the guys that were with me, they didn't even notice it. I thought that's strange because I had heard that many times and I never really knew what to believe, what to think of it. But anyway, so I just thought it was curious, and the way it was written was very curious. It was, like I said, very precise. And I was being driven to the airport, and then I flew home. And when I got home, I turned my phone back on, and there was a text from a friend of mine, and she said, "You need to join Twitter." And I was like, "Twitter? What do I join Twitter for?" I mean, I had heard of it, I knew what it was, but I never really got the concept. I really didn't care for the concept. I mean, I didn't get it. And I was like, "Oh, whatever." But I came home and I decided, hey, let me look into this Twitter thing. So I did, and she had joined. So I had to I had to start following people, right? I didn't know anyone that would be on Twitter, so I looked her up and I found her and I started following her. And she had signed up the day before that day, and she had one tweet, and her tweet was, "Don't believe everything you think." And I was like, really? I said, okay, this is too weird. I get it. I get it. And so I really started concentrating on that. That hit me hard. Um, but I always say, be very careful about what you do believe. And I can tell you story after story. But I remember, and I learned this early on in my career. I would see patients, who would think, oh, that medicine's going to cause me a problem. And those patients were much more likely to have issues. And there were other patients who believed the medicine was going to, help them and be beneficial, and they were more likely to get some benefit from it. Things like that. So that's not to say you shouldn't have some beliefs, but just be very careful and be cognizant that your beliefs affect your life to a degree, and your emotions to a degree, to a huge degree that we don't really talk about much in our society. And so I used to have a whole series, a whole seminar series that I did on the biology of beliefs. And it's incredibly powerful, right? That's the placebo effect and things like that. And I didn't think about putting that in here, but maybe we'll talk about that at some point. But very powerful. Placebo effect is so powerful that the pharmaceutical industry has to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to do studies to compare their medication to a sugar pill and to show that it works better than a sugar pill, meaning the sugar pill works. Okay, so very, very powerful. Choose your beliefs carefully. Examine your beliefs. Do a process of inquiry, right? So we don't talk much about inquiry in our society, but it's been around forever. It's in every form of spirituality that's out there, from Buddhism and Zen to Ramana Maharshi, who has a process called "Who Am I?" An inquiry process. Byron Katie has the work of her work. That's where it's 4 questions um, that you use to inquire about every single issue, any issue that's going on in your life. The Christians have contemplative prayer. In fact, Padre Pio, if you ever heard of him, he's a Catholic mystic. He said, through the study of books, one seeks God. By meditation, one finds him. And you can substitute prayer there for meditation, if you want, in the Christian sense. Another thing we'll talk a lot about is the two main voices in your head. So we have a lot of voices in our head, a lot of different characters, and we can talk about that. I did an exercise years ago where I identified as many of these characters as I could, so you might say I had multiple personalities. But we all have these voices in our head. But what I really learned on that is that, yeah, there are many, but really it's two main voices. It's really the victim and the judge. And the judge beats up on the victim, and the victim plays the victim. And we'll talk about what it means to be the victim, and how you notice that, or how you know that you're choosing to play the victim. Well, here's how you do it. So become aware of those two main voices, and be careful with the victim, because it's a trickster, right? It can be very sneaky. And most of us don't even realize that we're doing it, but we're doing it. And remember, from my perspective, this is what this is all about. All of this is a choice. All of life is a choice. So how do you know if you're playing the victim role, or choosing the victim role, or choosing to be on the victim path, as I like to say? And that is, anytime you experience a negative emotion, you're choosing to play the victim. Now, think about that, because that's very powerful. All right. And this is other thing that was important for me was, again, I'm not great at identifying emotions. And so this worked well for me, because I didn't have to identify an emotion. It didn't matter if I was in all out rage, or if I was a little peeved, and every negative emotion in between. I realized that when I was experiencing those emotions, I was playing the victim role. And again, if you think about it enough, you'll start to see how that works. Uh, Maybe let me use an example there. So for instance, um, how might this play out? You go to Wendy's to get your dinner, and you go inside, or you order at the drive-through, because Lord knows you have to park and walk all the way in. And we go through the drive-through, we order our food, and you ordered a chicken sandwich, and you decided you'd get fries because you were had a really bad day and you deserve those fries, right? And so you go home, and you're trying to be good, right? But you didn't really want to get fast food, but you had a long day and you're tired, and but at least you got the chicken sandwich instead of the hamburger, and maybe you got a grilled chicken sandwich. So you get home, and you sit down, kick off your shoes, and you open up the bag, and you find that you've got, you know, a, a double bacon cheeseburger. Maybe you live 10 minutes from the Wendy's, right? So now you're upset, right? Because you didn't get what you ordered. And and but you're justified, right? I mean, you are a victim, right? I mean, because you ordered something, you got the wrong thing. And you were trying to be good getting a grilled chicken sandwich, and they gave you a double bacon cheeseburger. Baconator. 9 strips of bacon on it. Right. So you look at that and you say, well, how can I not be a victim? Because I am. I didn't get what I wanted. Right. So you're upset. You're mad. Right. You may be a little peeved. You may be out. You may be full of anger. That's your choice, kind of how you're going to respond. All right. So you've. It seems like it's an automatic response, right? But it's actually, if you stop and you remember, there's that gap, that space between the event, which I always say is neutral, and the response. And so you could be like, I don't know, a saint, and say, oh, this doesn't bother me. I'll go ahead and eat my, you know, double cheeseburger baconator thing and whatever, right? And try not to let it bother you, right? But let's face it, most of us, even if we did that, we're still gonna be upset that we're the victim. And we might even, you're talking to your friend that night, and you go, oh God, can you believe this? I was so tired, and then I didn't. I went to Wendy's. I really didn't want to, but I was trying to get a salad, or I was trying to get the grilled chicken, and I ended up, instead of the grilled chicken and salad, I ended up with a double bacon cheeseburger and fries, and they were supersized. And so again, so you're gonna call and up, oh, you poor thing, I can't believe, that you would get that, that I can't, it's that's awful, whatever. So you find people who are gonna support your victimhood, right? Now, you still have a choice. You could just sit and eat it and try to be a saint. You could sit there and eat it and be angry. You could decide to go back, drive the 10 minutes to go back to get what you wanted. So let's say you decide to go back, and as you're going, you go, okay, I'm trying to be good. I'm trying not to let things bother me, right? I'm trying to be compassionate and such. And so I'm just gonna be nice and say, hey, you gave me the wrong thing, and maybe I'll get a something for doing that, like a free frosty or something. Yeah, that'll be good. So you go back, and they go inside, and there's the kid that gave you the wrong food, and he looks at you and he said, hey, I ordered maybe even got your receipt. I ordered this grilled chicken, and I got this bacon cheeseburger. And he'll say, oh, I'm sorry, and he gives you this grilled chicken and wraps it for you and says, oh, there you go, I really apologize. Now you're like, oh, wait a minute, what do you mean? Like, you just giving me the what I ordered? I mean, I expect you might not say this, but hey, I'm expecting like a free frosty, or a coupon for a free meal, or something to fix this, right? To make it right, because you got to make it right. Okay. So again, so now your ire is starting to go back up, right? You're starting to get angry, and you might then say, hey, I want to talk to your supervisor. Who's your manager on tonight? And the manager comes over, and now the kid's all nervous, and the manager says, what's the problem? You say, well, I ordered a grilled chicken sandwich, and I got this bacon cheeseburger, and I drove all the way home. I had to drive all the way, it was all that way. It was like 10 minutes. I mean, it was far, and now I had to drive all the way back. And and they say, oh, okay. Well, let me get you the chicken. No, I already got the chicken. He gave it to me. Oh, okay. Well, you got what you ordered. Is there another issue? Well, no. Okay. But what? So again, you're worked up, right? You're still playing the victim in that whole thing. You're having the negative emotion all that time, all those ways you're playing victim. Okay. Now, another choice might be, I call this the BOD, benefit of the doubt technique, right? And so you go in there, and you have no idea. Here's this 19-year-old pimply faced kid who gave you the wrong thing, right? For all you know, maybe he's there, and he's living at home, and maybe his dad is sick, and he's working. His dad's now on disability because he's sick, and he's working to bring in some extra money to help the family pay their rent. It's possible, right? You don't know. You have no idea. And now he's really upset because he gave you the wrong sandwich. He's feeling not good enough, and now you're asking to talk to his supervisor, and maybe he screwed up, yesterday, and the supervisor said, talked to him and said, you can't screw up again. And now he's going to start getting worried maybe about his job, and he needs this job to help, support the family. Because if you knew that, if that really was happening, you wouldn't have any issues, right? You wouldn't be all angry. You'd be more compassionate with him, and you'd be saying, oh, I'm sorry, I know you're lots going on. Just give me my chicken sandwich. It's not a problem. And you really would feel compassion, and you really would not be upset, right? But you have no idea if that's going on or not. You chose to play the victim, so you chose to believe the kid's just a screw up and he messed up your order, right? Because that's still a belief too. So doing the second one, choosing to give him the benefit of the doubt, it takes a conscious effort. It doesn't come natural, right? But when you, as you practice it and you notice these negative emotions, and the neat thing about this is you can always choose again, right? So you don't, even if you've getting upset and you notice, I'm getting upset here, I'm getting upset, I'm having a negative emotion. I don't know what it is. It may be fear, it may be anxiety, it may be rage, it may be anger, it may be, you know, annoyance. Doesn't matter. It's a negative emotion. I'm having a negative emotion. You recognize it that way. Anytime you realize you're having a negative emotion, you're playing the victim. Stop. I mean, not stop being the victim. Stop as far as you know what's going on, and now you can choose what direction you're going to go. You can choose to give them the benefit of the doubt or not. Now you practice the self compassion, the independent of what you choose. So if you choose to give them the benefit of the doubt, great. Or if you don't, great. But when you do this with awareness, so sometimes I'll do this. I'll stay with the negative emotion. I'll stay on that victim path, but I'm doing it consciously now. I'm doing it with awareness. And as I do that, I notice the whole thing changes. Again, there's magic in it. I can't explain it. It just, trust me, it happens. I was working, I work for this company where we have to do these, we call them peer to peer calls, talking with these physicians who have had something that they ordered, a test or something that was not approved, and they're calling to try to get it approved. And you can imagine, you're right, some of these calls can get pretty adversarial, pretty confrontational. Who are you? I'm seeing this patient. You don't know anything about this patient, and you're saying no, and um, on and on, right? So I tend to do pretty well with them. This one particular day, uh, this guy just started right from the beginning. He was upset, and he was very confrontational, and he was complaining because there was this woman who had something called a coronary calcium score, and her score was really low. It was 9. Now, just to give you an idea, a high score is considered like over 400, and a score less than 100 is on the low side. Your age affects it a bit too, but let's just say the 100 is on the low side, and between 100 and 400 is kind of an intermediate sort of level. And the guidelines say if our guidelines say if it's over 400 and you're having some symptoms, you can have this expensive kind of stress test. So he wanted to do this expensive kind of stress test, but this lady's score was 9. Okay. So it didn't meet the criteria. So I told him, well, her score is really low. And if it's over 400, you can do it. But, when it's 9, that's kind of like too low. You can just do a regular type of stress test. It's a lot less expensive. And he said, "Well, who are you to decide? Because that number of 400, that's just an arbitrary number, and that was chosen. And you could have chosen a lot lower number, which is true. We could have chosen 100, right? But we wouldn't have we wouldn't have chosen 9. But regardless, so but he's getting all worked up, and I'm getting all worked up, which is kind of interesting because I don't usually get too worked up over these things anymore. But I notice that I'm really starting to, it's becoming pretty. It's this conversation's headed south real fast, and I noticed that. That's all I did. I just noticed the negative emotion. Okay, and as I noticed that negative emotion, I kind of said, "Huh, that's interesting," because I don't that doesn't normally happen, but boy, it's happening now. And rather than beat myself up and saying, "What's wrong with you? You've been practicing this stuff. You teach this stuff. What is, what's up with that? You're no good. You whatever." Rather than doing all of that, I thought, "Man, that's interesting. I wonder what happened that made me react this way." But the neat thing was with this technique, you don't even have to figure that out at that time. I just knew I was having a negative emotion, and in my mind, I was choosing to play the victim, right? I didn't know why, but I just know I was choosing that. So I sort of just became aware of that. It became intently aware of that, and I didn't beat myself up over it. I didn't try to change. I didn't try to like all of a sudden, try to be whatever. But in that acceptance, self acceptance, I started really listening to what he was saying. And out of the blue, and I don't know where this came from because this is not something I would normally say or do, but as I'm listening to him, all of a sudden I just come out of my mouth comes, you know, I know that you're really trying to do the best you can for this patient. Silence. And again, it's not normally something I would say. And I said, I know this is tough. I know I've been on the front line. I know when you see these patients, it's hard to know what to do. And I know you're trying to do the best you can. And you know what? I'm trying to do the best I can also. And you have an advantage. You're right. You get to see the patient. I don't. I just have your notes and stuff to go by. I said, I think we got off on the wrong foot. Maybe we could start this over. So all of a sudden we started over and it was a completely different conversation. And I had sort of stopped judging him because I really believed I was giving him the benefit of the doubt that he was doing the best he could. And all of a sudden, in the end, he still didn't get what he wanted. He agreed to do the regular treadmill, a regular kind of stress test. And yet we were kind of joking around at the end. That's the magic. I don't know how it happened. I don't know where that came from, right? The thought of saying that. But again, in the fact that I chose not to beat myself up at that point, and I chose not to beat him up and judge him, within all of that, there was magic, as I like to call it. I hope that makes sense. I like to say that life is lived completely in our head. Many of you have heard of Viktor Frankl. Hopefully, all of you have. Viktor Frankl is a Austrian psychologist. He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And Viktor Frankl was in the Holocaust. He was in a concentration camp, and he noticed, he was already a psychologist, and he noticed in the concentration camp that there was a very, very small group of individuals who somehow didn't get depressed. Okay, and he found that not only were these people uplifting to all the other inmates and their friends in the concentration camp, they were also more likely to survive, believe it or not, the concentration camp experience. Now, I think all of us would agree that the concentration camp is probably the worst of the worst, right? There are many bad things, but that's at the top, right? I mean, it's certainly within the top 3 or 4 things of horrible events. And if you can be in that situation and have a group of and be an individual or group of individuals that can still not get depressed over that, then there's something about all of this idea of living life in our head, right? And so what he wrote was that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, including a concentration camp, to choose one's own way. And the key there is that word choice again, right? To choose. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we're challenged to change ourselves. And what do we change about ourselves? Just our perception of the situation. So you remember the slide, the event and the stimulus, the gap and the response. He calls that the stimulus response um, cycle or whatever. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. There's magic in that gap. That's where happiness lies. And it's a choice. It seems automatic. It seems natural, but it's just a habit. And you may not be able to change it at that moment because it's a habit. So you may still have gone and reacted your habitual sort of way. but you can notice it, and then you can always choose again. That's the cool part, right? When I was on the phone, I had the choice. I could have continued going down that space, not beating myself up, but just choosing to continue being the victim, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing here about this is better or worse. This is right or wrong. It's none of that. It's just it just is, right? It's just a different way of being. Now, being in the victim path, as I like to say, always ends in misery. It leads to misery. And the path is lined with all these negative emotions, right? Anger and fear and rage and grief and sadness. Whereas the non victim path ends in peace. It may not be a happy experience, but it's a peaceful experience. And it's lined with more positive emotions. Many of you probably saw the movie Invictus. If you haven't, I encourage you to see it. The story of Nelson Mandela, and the you know the I knew the story, but the movie I think did a great job in helping us understand that Mandela somehow, even though he was imprisoned for no good reason and all these terrible things were done to him, he carried no resentment when he came out of prison toward these people who did all these horrible things to him. He had all the right to do that, right? Everyone would say he should be, he's in there like 30 years, the prime of his life. We would all support his victimhood and say, "Oh, that was horrible. I can't believe they did that to you. That's terrible. They ruined, the prime of your life, yada yada yada." But he knew that carrying that resentment wasn't going to help him and his country get rid of apartheid. And so he carried literally no resentment toward those people for doing those horrible things. And in prison, he read this poem called Invictus by William Ernest Henley, right? And it says, it matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. So some references to Christianity there. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. That's what that's talking about. I'm the master of my fate. I can't choose the events. I can't alter the events. I can't change the events. I don't dictate the events that are happening, but I can choose how I'm going to perceive them. Byron Katie says, when you believe when you believe that a problem is caused by someone or something else, you become your own victim, right? Well, we say, well, it is someone else. They hit me. Of course it was someone else, right? Miguel Ruiz says, in one of his four agreements, don't take anything personally. Like, well, they did this to me. How can I not take it personally? It is personal. Well, we're going to try to get to that place where you see that this is not personal. The only difference between heaven and hell is believing a thought. I love that quote. This is my favorite. What I believe about the tone of your voice is the cause of my own suffering. Corporate America communicates with emails today. I have seen more uh, misunderstandings and more victimhood over an email, a, a belief of a tone of an email that didn't even exist. And we see this all the time, right? So at work, we all communicate with emails, right? And it takes a while to type. We're all busy, and so their email tends to be short, sometimes curt, right? And many times, oh, what are you all upset about? Oh, I got this horrible email from my boss or from whoever, right? And I can't believe, they were so mad or whatever. Oh, let me see the email. And you read it and you're like, what? I don't I don't think that it's it's so negative. I don't think the tone of this email is nearly as bad as what you have, what the way you interpreted it, right? And so I will frequently try to put a lot of emojis and stuff in my emails to make sure that they don't get misconstrued. They're not always pleasant ones. Sometimes, sometimes they are meant to be direct and adversarial. Um, Steps to understanding the foundation, to understand the unconscious beliefs you have toward yourself. And again, that's what we're going to be working toward. So here's the key. And this is really a challenge to understand because this is not the way we think of our world. Okay. But it becomes very helpful whether you believe it or not. And Einstein even said this. And there's a long quote. I should have included it here, but it's a very long quote. And I'll see if I can find it. But the he that we believe we're separate from everything, right? Well, we don't see the oneness, but it's very helpful if you can start to see that your outer world, the world that you see, is nothing but a reflection or a projection of your inner beliefs about yourself. So that if you're filled with self-hatred, you're going to see hatred and violence in the world. And again, if you start to pay attention to that, you'll start to see how key and how important that is. Marianne Williamson is much more eloquent than I am. She says, everything we do is infused with the energy with which we do it. So if we're frantic, life will be frantic. If we're peaceful, life will be peaceful. If you think of it in this way, um, I think it'll start to make more sense than the way I said it or the way I think of it. What whatever you believe about yourself on the inside is what you will manifest on the outside. And if you don't like that word manifest, because you feel like you're bringing it into the world, it's what you'll see on the outside, which is helpful. Wow, we're already at the end of session two. Man, we moved. Almost 9 o'clock. Um, let's try a brief exercise. Let me see if I can get rid of this. I'm going to bring up the questions. Can you guys hear me okay now? I wasn't looking at the comments. Trying to turn the mic up. Is that better? Can you hear me better now or not? Can you hear me at all? Anybody? Uh-oh. Thanks, Julie. All right. All right. Or try a little exercise. See again, this is trying to figure out if um, if we can make the trying to the neat thing about the live sessions is that we have exercises that we do, and in the small group setting it's kind of becomes fun and close and everything. um in the webinar it's more difficult, but we may be able to use some anonymity and maybe people will bring stuff up. So rather than um trying to bring someone in, which eventually we might do that, we might see if people want to discuss their stuff, agree to it. But in the meantime, I'm going to give you a little exercise. And then if you could just type, you can do this on your own. You don't have to type it in, but if you would share some of it, just type it in the question and box, and it'll be, and then we'll see how if I can then relate them all to the same thing. So write down a behavior that you have that causes you difficulty or discomfort or concern. Okay, so this might be something that people have commented on, something that you bothered you your whole life, right? It's something that you probably have worked on, right, as a self-improvement sort of goal. Okay. Um, I'll give you some examples. Usually the most common ones are involve, eating or exercising or working, talking too much, addictive kind of behaviors, whether it's alcohol or exercise or smoking, compulsive kind of behaviors, um, patterns of how you might relate to others, things like that. Uh, so think about that for a minute, and if you would uh, type type those in and in the question boxes. All right, being a loner. Um, so that I'm taking that's a you're seeing that as a negative. Some people might see that as a positive. Eating too much is another good one. Obsessive traits. Okay, obsessing over money. Eating too little. So there we go. So now we've got eating too much and eating too little. So you see how you can use either one both ways. You understand what I'm saying? So some people would fear about, they wish they would eat less, but then there are other people who are eating little that are where they think that's a problem. Professional success, always being concerned with weight, alternating between restricting and binging, causing guilt, shame, and embarrassment. So again, a lot of stuff um, overeating. So these are things that we use to beat ourselves up over. Eating disorders, can't quit smoking. There's a good one, right? So as you see when you look at this, it starts to become obvious that we all have stuff that we hate about ourselves, right? So here's we um, people think they're too forgiving, right? So most of us think of forgiving as being a positive thing, right? But we can look at it as a negative and say we're actually too forgiving, and that this is a big issue. So, but again, these are all things that we use to beat ourselves up. And as you can see, it doesn't matter what the issue is, you can make it a negative. In other words, for people who eat too much, they make it a negative. But there are people who eat too little or have eating disorders and eat too little. So it can go either way. There are people who don't forgive enough, they carry anger and resentment. There are people who forgive too much. So most of us would think forgiveness is a good thing, but yet you can make it a positive or a negative. The guilties of woulda, shoulda, coulda, right? Um, yeah. So that again, I am no good, right? I'm not good enough. I should have done this. I could have done that. Why didn't I do that? I should have. Allowing people to run all over me, right? So other people would say, "Oh, I'm too mean. I don't let I always feel people are trying to take advantage of me, so I'm always mean." And I'm then other people will say, "Well, I'm too nice," and I like so it's like again, either way, you can see how you can take. I don't care what the situation is, you can make it a negative. And again, all of these, the key on these is that we all have stuff, we all have issues that we hate ourselves over, that would makes us feel unworthy or guilty or not good enough, right? and and the neat thing about that is that you can actually use that in this system in a very productive, very efficient, very effective way. You can actually take no matter what it is that's going on and relate the behavior to feelings of unworthiness or I like to call it not good enoughness, or I call it NGE. And that you can then actually use that to predict behaviors. And this works in in relationships as well, right? So, and I'm not talking about just like big relationships, like romantic relationships or relationships with parents or siblings or children or whatever. I'm talking about every relationship, right? So, um, so if you had a bad day and you decide you're going to go out to dinner, right? But you're in this foul mood because things didn't go right, and um, you go out to dinner and you happen to get, I don't believe in coincidence, you happen to get this waiter or waitress who's also having a bad day. So I like to say you attract each other or you push each other's buttons. Okay. So then you're sitting there and um, you ask for your steak medium rare that you ordered, and it comes more medium than medium rare. And so you tell the waitress, "Hey, I ordered this medium rare and it's medium." And she looks at it and goes, "Well, okay, looks medium rare to me, but fine, I'll take it back, right?" And she might be, maybe thinking, "Well, this is going to reflect negative on me. It's the chef's fault. It's not my fault. Now it's going to maybe affect my tip." And maybe she's having a hard time because she's a single mom and her kid is sick, and she couldn't take off from work, and she had to try to get someone to come, or maybe she took the kid to daycare anyway, even though he was sick, and hope that the daycare doesn't call her, right? And so that could be going on. And if you knew that was going on, you would have acted completely different, right? But instead, you're going to choose to play that victim role with the waitress because you were quote unquote having your own bad day and you're choosing to be the victim. She's also realizing playing the victim, right? So you can start to see how you can use this and look at this. And once you can give her the benefit of the doubt and give yourself the benefit of the doubt for that matter, and find gratefulness or gratitude in this whole situation, you can start to slowly see how effective this actually turns out to be. And it's not hard to do. The hard part is releasing the victimhood because we want to be the victim. We want, right? We believe we deserve to be, I've had a bad day. I deserve to be treated well. I deserve to go out to eat and to have my steak medium rare because that's how I ordered it. Truth of the matter is it probably was medium rare, but it just looked medium to you because that's what you were wanting to see because you didn't want it to be right because you wanted to be the victim so that you could then go home and call your friends and tell them, and I was tired or whatever, and then I ordered the steak and it was like well done and it was dry and it was horrible. So again, the idea of that exercise is really to begin to see that no matter what the issues are, you can relate them to your own feelings of unworthiness or not good enoughness. It's a great question. Great question. How do you deal with people who regularly play the victim? So the neat thing about this is, again, it sort of gives you this ability to know what's going on. Because in my world, I literally look at this as as continuous and happening 100% of the time, just continuously playing out. Okay. So from my perspective, everyone is, now there are rare individuals like say Byron Katie, those kind of types of people who don't do this, but those people are so rare, like, you never find them. So let's not ignore those. For most of us mere mortals, we all do this, me included. Everyone does this. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with doing it, but it's the recognition, the awareness that everyone's doing it. That's where the magic is, okay? So that what you do is you don't, what I call, support the victimhood, or you don't play into it, right? And so sometimes if you just listen without buying into it, things will come to you to say that you never would have thought of saying. And maybe that's just listening, better listening, like I said with the guy on the phone. But if you're dealing with someone who always plays the victim, remember, everyone is doing this all the time. Now, some people are much better at it than others. I will grant you that. Some people can make much bigger victim roles or play victim roles. And you ever notice, like I remember when I when I was in medical school, I was doing rotations, and you see a lot of in medical school, a lot of indigent patients that come in, right? Because they go to medical schools, and and I remember there were times when I would come out and I would all these things that happened to this person. You'd be taking this history, right? And you'd come out and you'd wonder to yourself, how can so much bad stuff happen to one person, right? And then you'd hear it again in the next one and again the next time. And it was like amazing to me. Like I just couldn't believe that all this bad stuff could happen to these people, right? But they were that good at playing up that victim role. And so when you start to look at it in that way and not judge it, that's the key. Being aware, this person playing the victim regularly, you watch them and you listen and you don't try to say anything necessarily. You may say something, right? But you sort of just listen and watch and say, look at now and remember this and just, say, I remember what he was saying that everyone's always playing the victim. Look at how Joe is doing it, right? It's amazing that it's fun to watch and you say these people play this victim roles and they try to make it bigger than it is. Like it's really not that big of an issue and they try to make it bigger, right? And you're watching this and you're sort of like scratching your head going, man, what? That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing, right? And then you start to realize, well, I do that too, right? And so watch it, listen, be aware that they're doing it. Don't try to have an answer. Don't support the victim and oh, you poor thing, I can't believe that happened to you. That's horrible. Whatever. You sort of don't go to that place. You go to the place of just listening and saying, you might not say anything, but you don't feel like you have to have the answer. Don't feel like you have to pat them on the back. You just sort of support them in the listening. And what hopefully you will find is either nothing will come to you, which is fine, or you might say something that you might not normally say. You will also find that you will attract less of these people. And the reason is because they're looking for someone to buy into their victimhood, right? To support their victimhood. And when you stop doing that, they may come around less, or they may not complain. They may still come around, but they may not complain to you or try to build that victim role up because people do that. Um, they're attracted to the people who are going to support their victimhood, or they're going to. I mean, maybe attract is not the right word, but they're going to seek the people out who are more likely to do that. Moms sometimes are good at that, right? Oh, you poor thing! I can't believe that horrible thing happened to you. That you know, and this happens in kids. It happens in adults. It happens. It happens in all. We all do it. We're all the same. There's no, like I said, rare exceptions. So that gives you this ability to use this, right, in any situation with anyone you're dealing with. I don't care if it's, a big relationship or the guy at the bank, that you just met. I hope that helps. Any other questions? All right. If there aren't any other questions, we'll call it a night. I think we're going to continue doing this on Sundays and Tuesdays. That's working for now. We'll probably have one more session of kind of lecture kind of stuff where I've got some slides, and then after that, it's going to be sort of open mic night. It might not be open mic like you have to talk necessarily, but more exercises. And then if there's not much interest or not much participation or not much in the way of things that we can use in a webinar, then we'll call it a series at that point. Um, I suspect there'll be a small group of you that might continue. Um, so I hope that helps. Um, any other questions? All right. It was great to share this with you tonight. See you next Sunday or Tuesday. Oh, one other thing, if you want the recording, I hope this one recorded because I wasn't good enough to start the recording last time, and so it didn't get recorded Sunday. But I think this one is supposed to record automatically, but I wasn't good enough to even pick the right things to make it record automatically. But anyway, this should have recorded. And if you want the recording, I email me. Eventually, what I think I'm going to try to have is a membership site on the website where you have to sign in, and all the recordings will be there, where you can look at these or watch them. I'm a little concerned if people do start sharing about just sending them out, because once people can download them, they can send them all over the place, and there may be a lot of sensitive stuff maybe in there. So I'd like to maybe put it on the website, but that's still a ways away until I get to that. In the meantime, there and this has mostly been just lecture stuff anyway, so there hasn't been any big stuff. I will put it in a Dropbox folder and give you access to it that way. But let me know, and I'll send you the link. If you want the slides separately, I can do that as well. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.